Julian Ashworth had walked past the pantry door 1,000 times without ever once opening it during the middle of a workday, which was precisely why on the Thursday afternoon he finally did. He wasn't prepared for what he'd find. He'd come downstairs for a bottle of water between calls, expecting the kitchen to be empty the way it always was at 2 in the afternoon, and instead heard something through the pantry door that stopped him mid-step. A small, careful sound, someone trying very hard to chew quietly, followed by an even quieter intake of breath. The specific sound of a person eating, as though they were afraid of being caught doing something wrong. He opened the door and found Alina Vasquez, the housekeeper, who had worked in his home for the past year and 8 months, crouched on an overturned bucket in the narrow space between the shelving, a small plate balanced on her knees. Hurriedly finishing what was clearly the previous night's leftover chicken, her whole body flinching at the sound of the door before she even looked up. Julian's first reaction was confusion, followed almost immediately by something that felt uncomfortably close to embarrassment, though he couldn't yet articulate whether the embarrassment belonged to him or to her. He said, "Alina, why are you eating in here?" She looked up at him with an expression he would spend the rest of that day, and many days afterward, trying to fully understand, not fear exactly, though there was some of that, but something closer to shame, deep and practiced, the look of someone who had rehearsed this exact discovery in her mind many times and had never once imagined it going well. She said quietly, setting the plate down as though even holding it now felt like evidence of something. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ashworth. I'll clean this up right now." What Julian did not yet know, standing in that doorway holding an unopened bottle of water, was that the answer to his simple question was about to unravel nearly 2 years of a life he had never once thought to ask Alina Vasquez about in any real detail. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness has no rank and grace wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to The Overlooked, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. Julian Ashworth was 43 years old, a venture capital investor who had built over 2 decades, a portfolio worth well over $400 million, and a man who had spent the 18 months since his wife's death in a specific, functional kind of grief that allowed him to keep working, keep functioning, keep the surface of his life intact while quietly outsourcing nearly every domestic detail to the small staff, who kept his large house running. He was not, by any honest accounting, a cruel employer. He paid fairly by the standards of his neighborhood. He rarely raised his voice. But he had also, in the specific way, successful. Grieving, distracted men sometimes do, stopped truly seeing the people who worked in his home as anything more than the reliable, quiet infrastructure that let him avoid thinking too hard about anything beyond his next deal and the ache he was still learning to carry. Alina Vasquez was 34, a single mother to an 8-year-old son named Mateo, who had been diagnosed 2 years earlier with a chronic kidney condition that required ongoing specialist care, medication, and, on bad months, hospital visits that Alina's health insurance covered only partially. She had taken the housekeeping position with the Ashworth household because it paid better than her previous job cleaning offices, and because Julian's longtime housekeeping manager, a woman named Diane, who had since retired, had structured the role with a flexibility Alina desperately needed around Mateo's medical appointments. What Alina had not fully accounted for, when Diane retired 8 months into her employment, was that Diane's replacement, a woman named Patricia hired to manage the household staff, brought with her a set of rigid, unspoken rules that Alina had learned to navigate mostly through fear and careful observation rather than anything explicitly stated. Patricia had made clear, in her first week managing the household, that staff meals were not part of the household budget in any official sense, that the previous informal arrangement where staff could eat modest meals during their shift was, in her words, not really appropriate, and that she expected the household's food inventory to be managed carefully enough that nothing would seem to be disappearing at a rate that might draw Mr. Ashworth's attention. She had never explicitly forbidden Alina from eating anything, she had simply created. Through a series of pointed comments and one uncomfortable incident involving a previous staff member, Patricia had dismissed over what she described as taking liberties with the kitchen, an atmosphere in which Alina understood, without ever being told directly, that eating anything in the house carried risk to Alina, needing every dollar of her paycheck for Mateo's mounting medical expenses, had developed over the following months. A quiet workaround that solved two problems at once. She stopped bringing her own lunch, saving that grocery money for Mateo's prescriptions instead, and instead ate small portions of the household's leftovers during her unpaid break. Always in private, always quickly, always in a way that left no evidence Patricia could use against her. The pantry had become her regular spot specifically because it was the one room in the house with a door that closed and no security camera. A detail Alina had noted with a specific, exhausted practicality months earlier, without ever examining too closely what it said about the situation she'd found herself managing. The dark part of this story is not a single dramatic event, but the slow, grinding accumulation of an entire year in which a hard-working mother had trained herself to feel like a criminal for eating leftover food in a house with more food in it than any three families could reasonably consume. All so she could keep every possible dollar flowing toward her son's health. All while the man who employed her remained almost entirely unaware of any of it, having delegated the household's internal culture to a manager he trusted, without ever examining what that trust actually cost the people working under her. Julian, standing in the pantry doorway that Thursday, did not yet understand any of this. What he understood, watching Elena's hand shake slightly as she reached to clear the plate, was that something about her reaction did not match the situation as he currently understood it. He said, more gently this time, "Alina, please, sit back down. You're not in trouble. I just want to understand what's happening here." She did not sit back down immediately. She stood instead, plate in hand, and said, with the specific careful evenness of someone trying very hard not to cry in front of an employer, "I know I'm not supposed to eat the family's food. I should have brought my own lunch. I'm sorry, it won't happen again." Julian said, "Who told you that you're not supposed to eat here?" Alina hesitated, clearly weighing the risk of implicating Patricia against the risk of continuing to lie about something Julian had now directly witnessed. She said finally, "Mrs. Patricia said the staff meals weren't part of the budget anymore. I didn't want to cause any problems, so I just started eating quietly during my break instead of asking." Julian felt something shift in his chest that he would later describe, trying to explain it to a friend as a specific kind of vertigo, the sudden, disorienting realization that an entire policy had apparently been operating inside his own home for months, shaping the daily experience of someone who worked there without his knowledge or approval, built on an assumption about his own values that was entirely wrong. He said, "That's not true. That's never been true. Alina, please, sit down and eat. Finish your food. I need to ask you some questions, but not because you're in trouble, because I think I've missed something important, and I want to understand what it is." What followed over the next hour, sitting together at the kitchen island in a conversation neither of them could have anticipated having that Thursday, was the fuller shape of Elena's situation, Mateo's diagnosis, the mounting costs, the careful monthly math of a single mother stretching every dollar toward her son's health, and the quiet workaround she'd built to avoid spending grocery money on herself, a workaround that had, over months, curdled into a specific daily shame she'd been carrying largely alone, hiding not because she was doing anything wrong, but because an atmosphere of fear had convinced her that she was. Julian asked carefully why she hadn't simply told him any of this earlier, not as an accusation, but because the question had genuinely never occurred to him to ask before that day, and he needed to understand the gap that had let this happen for so long without his awareness. Alina said, "You're very kind, Mr. Ashworth, but you're also very busy, and I never wanted to seem like I was asking for more than what my job already pays. Patricia manages the house. I didn't think it was my place to go around her to you directly." Julian sat with that for a long moment, understanding with a clarity that felt uncomfortable in the specific way true accountability often does, that his own distance and grief-driven detachment, from the daily operation of his household had created. Exactly the kind of vacuum in which someone like Patricia could impose rules that contradicted his actual values without ever being questioned, simply because no one below her in the household structure felt safe enough to bring problems directly to him. He did not handle what followed quietly or slowly. He met with Patricia the following morning and terminated her employment, not only over the meal policy but over what a broader review revealed to be a pattern of similar unspoken intimidation affecting the other two staff members in his household, all of whom, once Patricia was gone, and Julian made a genuine effort to speak with them directly, described versions of the same careful fear-based navigation Alina had been managing for months. He restructured the household's entire staff policy himself, working with an HR consultant to build clear, written guidelines around meals, breaks, and compensation that left no room for the kind of ambiguous intimidation Patricia had operated within, and made a point, going forward, of checking in personally and regularly with every member of his household staff rather than delegating that relationship entirely to a manager again. For Alina specifically, he did considerably more than simply correct the meal policy. Having learned the full scope of Mateo's medical situation, he arranged for the family's household health insurance benefits, which, as a household employer, he was entitled to offer and had simply never thought to structure properly, to be extended to cover Alina and Mateo, with considerably better terms than her previous coverage, eliminating the specific monthly financial strain that had driven her to skip her own meals in the first place. He set up the change quietly, through his benefits administrator, specifically avoiding any framing that made it feel like charity, insisting instead, when Alina tried to protest, that this was too much, that it was simply what her position should have included from the beginning. An oversight he was correcting rather than a gift he was bestowing. Alina Vasquez continued working in the Ashworth household for 2 more years after that Thursday, in a role that looked, in every practical sense, considerably different from what it had been under Patricia's management. Mateo's medical care stabilized under the improved insurance coverage, his condition manageable enough, with consistent treatment, that by the following year, his specialists described his prognosis in noticeably more hopeful terms than they had before. On the 1-year anniversary of that pantry conversation, Julian found Alina in the kitchen again, this time in the middle of the afternoon, eating a full lunch at the actual kitchen table without any hesitation. And he said, sitting down across from her, "I think about that day a lot. I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't needed a bottle of water at exactly that moment." Alina said, "I think about it too. Mostly I think about how long I would have kept hiding if you hadn't opened that door." Julian said, "I'm sorry it took me that long to actually see what was happening in my own house." Alina considered this, then said, with the specific gentle honesty that had grown between them over the following year, "You saw it the moment you actually looked. That's more than a lot of people manage even when the door is already open." If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to The Overlooked for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, has silence around something small ever hidden a much bigger struggle someone you know was quietly carrying?